exchange that money for some type of crypto token. There's a lot of different tokens out there. And
explain tokens, because I don't understand tokens. I know there's crypto and there's tokens. Like, what is the difference between the two?
You know, caught. In my view, what he did was criminal. That's why I started. But it hasn't been prosecuted or anything like that. But he's on a leaked private call. Everyone can go listen to it yourself. It's just this and it's like sort of what's left after the guy who kind of was spearheading this bill was a fraud. It's kind of tough. I was actually randomly some really perpetuated their fraud. I can break it down. How much do you know about the FTX
Let's
situation?
break it down for people that don't know about it. So
let's do it. So FTX was this crypto exchange. I started hearing about these tokens, and they're like, hey, selling courses, it's always the new grift. You always have to find, because people figure it out. They go oh, that actually doesn't work. Hey, drop shipping is located out in the Bahamas, which is a great place to put your...
Why do they do it in the Bahamas?
Because it's unregulated. So the problem with doing stuff in the United States, he thinks he can reestablish control because he's so smart. He is such a good liar that he's I can just lie my way out of it. So I think that's why he ultimately talked. His idea was, if I'm not actually this incredible business that you thought it was, that you're going to get rich easily. So don't do that. Go do crypto. You got to get into crypto now. And then it became an
whiz kid who you listen to him talk. He has an answer for everything. He's so articulate. He's so knowledgeable. I listened to previous interviews before he got busted.
What that was to hide it from people who were trying to take a look at his books. But it's just, that's what I mean by black box. You never know what games these guys are playing. They say, oh, here's sort of the rough estimate of our very treatable kind of cancer, and she's fine. But at the time I watched her as she's gets this diagnosis, gets swept up with all these hucksters who are telling her that the way to treat thyroid cancer, the house always wins, right? So when FTX was taking off, it just seemed like everyone who was someone was backing him. So then it was okay. And then I think a lot of these people deferred. FTX's influence went from the Bahamas reaching into the United States while technically not really being regulated by the United States.
Yeah, they were the number 2 donor to the Democratic Party.
Actually, campaign finance laws, I've heard, are pretty weak. I forget the name of the law, but it was passed in the early 2000s, 2010s maybe, where it actually became very easy to donate. Might be one of the first trillionaires or whatever. He's such a great entrepreneur. They think he's such a genius. It might have been one of the A1Z guys, or ARC, where it's you can donate through super PACs, political action committees, and you can donate as much as you want, and you don't have to be, your name has to appear nowhere. And so that's actually very strange. And these offshore entities were also using U.S. branches. There's FTX US, which was more regulated, but not really that regulated. It's where's the money? I don't know. But he controls everything. And so it's this is the tactic of these offshore companies is you put the person in the space to where people thought, okay, well, if he's saying it, he's a guy who only says positive things about crypto because he's a crypto executive. So if he's saying there might be problems, there's probably some problems.
But
if you're Alameda Research and you're funneling money through a personal investor, that I think is the problem. His whole thing was he did this thing with Ultimate Bet. So he was one of the lawyers. So there's this poker site called Ultimate Bet. And he got caught in this scandal where they had enabled this thing called the Son of Harvard Lawyers. We just sort of can't lose. And nobody paid attention to some of the red flags that were going on until ultimately it was too late. It turns out he was pill assets. You can check yourself. I have $1 billion in USDC. Well, that's great. But it doesn't matter if I have $1 billion in crypto, Bitcoin, whatever, if I owe $2 billion.
Right. What exactly? What are the regulations in terms of what you're allowed to do and donate, and how did he violate them?
So I think the big violation was you're not supposed to, and it just was kind of. I was just trying to find my way. I was just trying to even before that I had done a show where I was trying to break down these topics. I was and then he goes into the crypto space and he launches FTX.
He's very young, right? How old is he?
I think he is young. I'm not. Maybe you can look that up, Jamie. 31 with regulators. They were all Sam was working really closely with regulators to try to get regulations passed. And CZ felt like he was cut out. So that stirred up this battle between them. And ultimately, because every day it's getting less valuable. So the question is, what do you do if you're in that country making money? If you want
to do something like that, like why would he publicly communicate?
This is why it's so interesting to me to look at fraud. Like, this is why it fascinates me, as well as I think it's an important thing. Guy who enabled God, or who helped cover up God mode. And he's like, well, I don't want to comment on other, people, or it's just like,
well, how does he skate on that? Like, how chemtrails?
Let me say this. If it's too good to be true, if they're offering market returns that you want to believe in, you go, man, I want to believe this is real. And that's ultimately what he was doing. But it also looks like he was donating through some of his executives. And, I mean, the whole thing was shady all the way down. Like, there was already all this worry in the past. That summer, there had been a bunch of companies that collapsed, and people had never thought FTX. It was kind of the first time anyone thought FTX could maybe not have the money. Lateral, like, dollars or like some asset will give you FTT tokens, which is their own invented coin. And that should have value if anything goes wrong. And people were accepting that as value, but really taking that, I mean, maybe some of them were taking it seriously, but not enough.
So if FTX didn't encourage regulation and CZ didn't get upset at that,
this stuff went down, and a report comes out from CoinDesk where it shows FTX's balance sheet. It shows actually what tokens they have. For one of the first times, it was kind of
party.
That's right, but
also to the Republicans.
This is what's wild. So Sam knew publicly in our current American climate, like he said, well, hey, can we restructure all this money that went through me like a loan so that we can, say that I took a loan out and I was donating so we didn't violate any laws. They never ended up doing that. I went to school for chemical engineering and hated it. I was miserable. I was like, I do not want my life to be earning 2% more of, of a bottom line for ExxonMobil. Or any...
Or is it just pure addiction? I think, those multiplayer games, those, online role-playing games, that's what that is, right? It's like
I think it's is it a MOBA? IEX said in their terms of service. So one of the really big problems was they actually weren't doing that, but nobody knew because nobody had to look at their books. Like, it was very opaque. Or with just put a bunch of garlic cloves in the pot. I still remember our house, like, reeked. She would put 60 cloves of garlic in a stew. If you're from this one, you're not okay. Or I might say, hey, like, CZ has connections to China. Like, maybe that's a problem. Or CZ has connections to here. Maybe that's a big deal. This is what was going on in crypto. They're called collateralized loans. But what FTX was doing was they were saying, hey, like, we'll take $1 million from you, but instead of giving you...
What was the first video?
I started as sort of like an interview show. Nothing about scams. I had a channel before it. Something, because I was just like, why does this make some people tens of millions of dollars and nothing happens? Why? Everyone loses confidence. Everyone sells their FTT tokens. No one wants to buy it. It's worth nothing.
So how did this all fall apart?
Great question. So don't invest. Like, that's a bad idea.
People were calling bullshit, though. Just like they were calling, there was a few people that were wary that were calling bullshit on Bernie Madoff, and there was a few.
But even Western Union has been they've been getting kind of pinched a little bit. Like, hey, you guys got to stop allowing all of this. But in crypto, because there's no pilfering FTX, the customer deposits, and was using it in Alameda Research, which was his trading firm, to try to make extra money. And he lost it.
And so this is all because it's on
money and go start trading with it. Unless, obviously we have FDIC insurance, stuff like that. But like, they didn't have that. They just take your money, go trade with it, and that's where the disaster started. There's wire transfer, and it's kind of expensive to do these. Like, you pay all these fees for wire transfers. So the idea is like, okay, well, if you have crypto, those wire fees can go down. And instead of taking, maybe a day or something, it'll take like Washington. And I think there was like a tweet from Sam saying like, oh, like, I'll see you the next time you're in Washington or something like that. But, like, it was kind of a dig because he knows CZ can't go to Washington. Like, he would be. So we were warning people, hey, this is probably insolvent. Get your money out. But CZ ultimately was the big, like, he was the most notorious and like well respected, your hands in both pockets. But publicly, he's just like, he's donating to Democrats because he says, oh, I'm like this, like, I care about all these issues.
Yeah.
But it's like even more cynical than just buying one party. Like, actually, his whole technique of shifting the blame like onto Alameda and like, I don't control Alameda. I've seen something very similar. I'm investigating this Ponzi scheme that's offshore.
How does a guy like that not wind up getting indicted?
I ask myself that every day. There's so many.
Is it a matter of time, or is it he's
right? It's all at some address, and so people were asking, like, you say you have all this Bitcoin, where's the Bitcoin? You say you have all this Ethereum, where's the Ethereum? And so now it's trying to be sorted out by the guy who literally unraveled Enron, and he says, this lawyer goes, it's worse than Enron.
It was like 70,000 or something like
60 plus, yeah.
So that's the lure. The lure is you buy in for pennies, and one day you're insanely rich. I'm sure you know about that.
So before, it's like if I send you $1 and then you send that dollar on, we can easily trace that back to me, right? It's like here. But if I send $1 to you and everyone's sending you $1, and then you're sending $1 to all, so they were paying everybody to promote this FTX crypto exchange. And the idea is this is the next big thing, right? And this is where you're going to make money. Then he comes up, prep school. He's kind of like built for success, right? He goes to MIT, goes to Jane Street as this quantitative trader. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's like people get away with it. It's just there's too many people doing it. And you'll catch some people, but ultimately a lot of people will just basically skate by, even though by all rights they should have been inevitable. It is inevitable. So something to understand. FTX was insolvent long before it was realized that they were insolvent. Right? So what are you saying in the terms of service that means that I can't sue you? You have all these terms of service that basically say none of what I'm saying is true. Like they say they can get you rich in the sales pitch, and then
each other on amphetamines and making billions of dollars. Like it sounds like a great story if it wasn't illegitimate.
Yeah, ultimately that's the problem. Like Sam was just hopped up on
involved in what you do.
It's a weird thing.
So when did you start your YouTube channel?
So I started it a few years ago, 2018, 2019, tease for a while. But like, so I eventually like pivoted into this crypto direction and learned all about that. But it started just from a curiosity about scammers and I wanted somebody to say back that bill, and now that it was all a fraud, or the guy who basically pushed it was a fraud, now they're like trying to retool it, make something work. If it's going to go to the public, you have to solve all these issues. And unfortunately, we saw crypto kind of go mainstream before they had more system to where they could see you, Joe, deposit a Bitcoin on FTX. They could grab that Bitcoin and start trading with it immediately. Even though they were never supposed to be able to teach this guy who drives a Toyota. So you go like, well, why does he need to scam me if he's driving a Toyota, right? Then it's like, which Sam Bankman-Fried did. Then it's like, okay.
One guy who lost a hard drive and who's paying people to go through a landfill to try to find his hard drive because there's billions of dollars worth of Bitcoin on that hard drive.
Yeah, people lose their executives. Ryan Salami or something. I think that's his last name. Salami. I don't know. I just don't know how to pronounce it. But he was like, the number 3 donor to the Republican Party. But it was all orchestrated through Sam A1Z, A16Z. It was one of those, Sequoia or A16Z. One of them wrote this glowing review of Sam, basically saying he's going to be one of the first trillionaires. So all the Friedberg, shady. This guy
allegedly shady.
Dan Friedberg. No, he's definitely shady. I'll say that. This guy.
What was his? I remember, but what was his
God mode on Ultimate Bet, where the CEO could see everybody's hands and play on the site, seeing everybody's hands. So he just money. Like, well, how can you view this as a battle? Like, but he viewed it as like we're sparring partners. Like, and you won this round or you won the war
because he thinks this is going to go on forever.
He's one of the leaders at the NASDAQ. I mean, he was one of the go-to guys. And so you thought, well, I invest with Bernie, like I can't lose. It's like almost, betting on the house. Sort of, this is a fraud because, no one knew. There's a bunch of backing. So I made a video at the time being like, this crypto CEO just describes a Ponzi scheme. FTT tokens and pay everybody out.
Oh, that's what he thought? He's on amphetamines, right? So he can't be thinking totally clearly.
All these other guys buy into him.
Right.
And then they themselves are kind of also looking at each other, being like, well, that guy did it. Like, what? It's the hottest deal. Reputable people like BlackRock, Sequoia Capital, they all invest in this guy. Kevin O'Leary famously promoted it for like $18 million.
They gave him $18 million to promote it?
He says...
And then when you have him on, there's a lot of, I wasn't aware, I'm not sure, I'm not aware of that, I don't know. There was all this hemming and
all these other wallets that it's impossible to know which of those new wallets my dollar's from. It's like, it's just crazy. It's a crazy idea.
Figured it out, and someone would have started dumping their coin.
Yeah, people already, I mean, even leading up, like CZ gets a lot of the credit for it, but like already, like a day before.
Analogy for losing your house?
You know what's funny? Yeah.
You know, I mean, good Lord.
The idea of these mixers was you'd anonymize your transactions. So like, let's say, so this is funny. They found his League of Legends account, and during some of the calls after it was a fraud, you could hear him clicking in the background. Click, 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 click. He's playing League. $10 million or your data's lost forever. And you're like, call the police, and you go, hey, track this guy. And they're like, to what? To a Bitcoin wallet? To stuff. You're just having to trust these shady offshore entities that they're telling the truth. Binance says they're fine. They show proof of reserves, but what are their liabilities? It means playing League of Legends while on investment calls. Like, at the time, that was seen as this charming, like, genius thing.
On calls.
On calls. You could hear even actually... Okay.
And sell off all his tokens. Would they be still solvent today or still in operation today? Would they not crash, or was this
these exchanges where it was worth more? So he was arbitraging this difference in prices, and then after he made his money that way, he'll have to. My feeling is offshore entities should not be. They're not subject to our rules. How can you allow offshore, like, yeah, I don't know. It's very
wild. The fact that they were all living together and fucking each other in this giant penthouse. This $40 billion penthouse. The things, it's insane. It's really, I almost wish...
We're just going to do a few transactions through your name. That just came out in a press release. It's the new charges. He was basically like they call him straw donors, because it's like, if I give money to you to give...
Did you interview him before the scandal?
No, not before the scandal.
So it's like as it was going down.
As it was going down, he goes on all these Twitter spaces. He doesn't want to... He's doing interviews with that. Put like let's say I have Ethereum, one Ether into this mixer, right? This pool of money. A bunch of people are putting one Ethereum into... You can't do that and then say, oops, I played a little too much of my video games and lost billions of dollars. Like, this doesn't fly.
Well, he wasn't saying that I played the video games and that's why I lost the money.
But the fact that this guy... He got away with lying so long and perpetuating this image of himself as this generous billionaire. You know, he's sort of the next Warren Buffett. That when everything goes wrong, you can know their assets. So it's like a big thing recently in crypto. They'll say, hey, we're going to show you proof of reserves. What does that mean? They mean we'll show you on-chain. All our victims would reach out to me. They'd be like, hey, I'd been scammed by this guy, and I didn't realize what was going on. And you showed me, you know, sort of like how the whole scheme worked. Lack of regulation and the ability to send peer-to-peer, which means like you and I can just send money to each other directly, no middleman. There's also a really huge opportunity for fraud, scams. You know it's kind of too good to be true, but the social proof is overwhelming, and it overwhelms your kind of like alarm bells. So the social proof is a combination of things. So first of all, it's like, I hate doctors so much, and it always seems to like end up with a sales pitch. Like, it never was like, hey, let me just give you this free thing. It was like always like there's a catch. Mm-hmm. So if you default on that loan, I'm out $1 million. Another way is I ask for, okay, I'll take some equity in the studio if something goes wrong, right? So I cover my butt if you default on it. Now, on sticks or something. Like, it was never, the problem was the foundation was wrong from the beginning. If you don't have enough deposits to cover withdrawals, you just don't have the money, right? These guys basically, a lot of these people backed Sam with the highest endorsements. And so if you're just an average person, you're thinking, well, how much more due diligence can I do than all these other guys? Sam wanted to basically influence politics by just donating. And the idea is you donate to both sides, you can never lose, right?
Yeah.
If you have I'm a millionaire by the time I'm 23 years old. Just buy my course. My course is, $2,000. Pay me $2,000. I'll teach you to get rich quick. So is buying both, lying about it so that you can get all the good press of like caring about all these social issues while also not caring at all of was going on. Now he's still like trying to say he did nothing wrong. He maintains he's innocent. And right now, actually, the big, like, kind of scam stuff, and you start to have repeat occurrences, like I just cover stuff all the time, and you see echoes of the same thing. I just had somebody just a couple of days ago, I was interviewing for this news scheme we're looking at, and he said, I know everything, I don't have access to the book. Like, I basically knew nothing, so anytime you'd call him out on an issue, you'd say, where's the money? He goes, well, I don't know. It's gone. It's Alameda Research. Ask Alameda. They're setting it up with, like, I used to be broke like you. Well, that's a strategy. A lot of these guys were never broke, right? It's just part of the story you have to tell to be really effective. It's like I start covering it, and then I start to get cease and desist letters. They don't like that. So they start to send me, they say, hey, you better shut up or we're going to sue you. And I was like, okay. I'm not going to stop making these videos. I used to be just like you, Joe, but then, I found out that doing Amazon drop shipping is the way to make millions of dollars. And, I used to fail, but by these little tricks, reasons that our banks have a bunch of anti-money laundering laws. There's a reason that they have all sorts of finance laws. It's not for their safety. It's for your safety. I mean, it's like they need to you withdraw. There's nothing tying your Ethereum to your particular address to like this random external address because you send it to a different one. Annoying. So like the famous example is like Coinbase is in America and they have to file all these forms. They're a regulated entity. They're publicly traded. It's kind of like, okay, it's a little bit chic to be donating to Democrats. You can do that without too much, negative press. But if I'm the number 3 donor to the Republican Party, that's going to be a bad look. That's what ultimately matters is how much do you have on deposits that you owe out. And so with Binance, we don't really know. The only one we have a little bit more of a look into is calling that a fraud early. I have a buddy of mine. He goes by Dirty Bubble Media on Twitter. He's like one of the Anon Twitter accounts. He was calling it a fraud.
And probably overly confident.
Yeah, it's pretty clear he didn't see like the full scope of the situation, especially at first. It seemed like he thought, he was like saying FTX US was such of that token, then you sell it off, and then the price plummets. So you thought you had a bunch of money, but actually it's worth nothing. Like there's all these new scams that have emerged as a result of people getting interested in this idea of an alternative, ultimately going to find out what we're doing here.
How many more of these are out there in the world?
As big as FTX, really going to sell most of our FTT that we got from that deal. And we're going to sell it. We don't know what's going on there. And all of a sudden it starts this firestorm because people are like, that is his background. And so I asked, Sam, I was like, what does it say if this is your chief regulatory officer? This guy.
I really enjoyed you catching him on Twitter Spaces. I really enjoyed that. I listened to that whole thing because before that you have this guy who's this,
I too am safe because Tom Brady's got his money there, so I can put my money.
So is the lure is like how Bitcoin used to be worth very little, and then one time it was with the high of Bitcoin,
Coinbase or something like that,
right?
So FTX launches. Let's start with who Sam Bankman-Fried is. He's kind of at the center of all of this. Sam Bankman-Fried is this guy who comes. He's the son of 2 Harvard lawyers. What they wanted to store some Bitcoin with Tom Brady. They wanted to be alongside Tom Brady. So he's like, there was fungibility between wallets.
Gotten away with it?
So many of these scams are like these issues of either regulators not having time, not having the resources, was going to undo sort of everything. Like if you don't root out the scams, you don't find ways to solve that, this is never going to work because if you're great, 5 minutes or 3 minutes. So I don't want to give off the idea that like there's nothing here. But the problem is that with the really everyone got to look at it all at once in one place. And people notice, like, wait a second. A lot of their assets are just their own tokens. Like they had a Serum token, which they control most of.
It's amazing that things with this amount of money can get this far sideways before anyone knows what's going on.
This is the problem with offshore accounts and stuff. Like regulation for, I guess, offshore crypto exchanges, right?
And so these campaign finance, these violations.
I saw all this, and my experiences up to that point, it kind of led me to like, I want to say something, but why is nobody saying anything? It just seemed like there was this, these people pitching this stuff, and nobody was talking about it. So I made this random video. Just is not surgery. You can just treat it naturally. Just don't worry about, hey, don't listen to the doctors. Don't listen to your general practitioner. You can just treat it with like colloidal silver. He'd be afraid of being indicted, or I don't really understand why he can't go, but he can't go to America. So Sam was meeting with regulators. CZ felt cut out, like he was basically going to get a bad deal with everybody. I asked him, and he doesn't want to talk to me. So, but he's going on these Twitter spaces. So I was tracking when he'd go on a Twitter space, and I would contact the people ahead of time and said, hey, I want to store your money somewhere else. How do you store it? So there's this idea of like these alternative currencies that are kind of interesting. And then there's some arguments that like, hey, if you're someone like me, I kept making the videos, and ultimately they never did. But I start doing that, and after I cover get rich quick schemes for a while, give you this yield, he starts to explain like this thing that sounds exactly like a Ponzi scheme. And so ultimately, Matt Levine's like, yeah, this doesn't really make a lot of sense. But again, it stopped short. They kind of shut down. Myself and some other people were saying, like, we think they're insolvent because we had taken a look at their numbers and we said, there's no way they have the money for this. They don't have the tokens of ads, like get rich quick schemes. Like you've got a bunch of people, flexing in their Lamborghinis telling you, they're like 25 years old telling you want to get rich by 25 or 22. I'll show you. I made $1 million. I'm this guy who's going to maximize good in the world. And that was his reason for working all the time. I mean, that's the justification to be hopped up on amphetamines. It's like maximize productivity, maximize human happiness. And he launches Alameda Research first, which is just like this trading firm, which basically the idea here is we have some ideas. We're going to raise a little bit of money, and then you'll launch your own token that people can invest in, sort of like they're investing almost in your crypto exchange. And so that was actually one of the ways that FTX. What I know is everyone's always interested in pulling up the ladder after them and like building the kind of the rule book around like, hey, like if you're from this certain jurisdiction that we're a part of, you're fine. If you're not, like balances. But oops, did I tell you about this $10 billion account? Like I forgot. It's so silly. You find, but like, it was very clear the internal conversations were they knew they were committing fraud. They knew they were doing things wrong. And this idea was, well, no one's going to catch us, right? Nobody's basically screaming about, all these scammers online. And unlike my previous work, which kind of had resonated, like it had gotten for some of these people making hundreds of millions of dollars. People are miserable at the end of it, and nothing happens. And that was the start of my show.
So you start just doing interviews and a lot of ums and ahs, and you just kept on him. It was amazing that first of all, it was amazing that he felt like he could.
It's sort of like hard. You kind of have to disprove every single, like there's always a new like health guy telling you that there's some new alternative discovery, whatever. And I was like, this is kind of weird. And I was like, why do they?
Bizarre that so many people got duped. And I felt the same way about Bernie Madoff. I'm not a financially aware person. I'm not into the market. I don't follow these things. It wasn't a scam. I've said this before because I root for nerds to like be that successful that you just completely living outside the norms of society, just fucking.
He lost it on the platform. He says the 18 million was on FTX or whatever, and he never got $1 out of it. But that was what the deal was for, like investment funds. They invested in a bunch of NFT projects. Mark Andreessen, I think, is the guy who runs it. And that video has aged so well because it's like people are like, Oh, it was all true. But people were outright calling it a fraud, like Mark Cohodes. He's a famous short seller. He lied my way into it. I can sort of lie my way out of it. And this is what he did. So prior to this, I'd interviewed him twice before, and I had kind of gotten hamstrung with he's just so good at dodging stuff. Found out how to be successful. And if you invest with me, I'll save you time. You could do it yourself, Joe. You could do it. But it's going to take you 5 years. Get with me, and I'm going to shortcut your success. And basically, shell games where you're hiding the money.
Yeah.
You're saying, invest in this. This is going to become valuable later. But you actually own a bunch of Ethereum. What are we tracking here? And then it goes to some mixer somewhere, and then we don't know where it goes after that.
So when Sam Bankman-Fried was working with
Scandal now is they're finding a bunch of campaign finance violations because he was trying to influence